Comparing Cultures project on the American and Native American cultures and their conflicts with one another. The European ego. The European ego consists of notions of invention and discovery, as well as conquest and evangelization. The Europeans focused on um, discovering land outside of Europe and sailing over the world. And when they got to America, they found the native people, and they were so proud of what they had done, discovering this land, that everything there prior really didn't mean much to them. The people there, the land there, the culture going on only inherited meaning since the Europeans arrived in their eyes. Fernandez de Oviedo said that these people of the Indies, although rational and of the same race as those of the Holy Ark of Noah, have become irrational and bestial because of their idolatries, sacrifices, and devilish ceremonies. So the Europeans really had a prejudice towards the Native Americans coming in, and had a weird resentment towards their culture and their behavior. Just because they weren't used to it, they saw it as devilish. Amaru, a great rebel and popular liberation theologian, saw Europeans as intruders. Um, and as it says later on, the Native Americans saw the Europeans as gods. So while at first the Native Americans, also not used to people of this color, they'd never seen other people before, they thought they were gods at first, but they soon realized that the Europeans were a threat and were invading their land. Um, the Europeans stepped on their culture, religion, and their history, and changed the whole course of their culture. They started enslaving everybody and capturing people, and even the chiefs of these tribes weren't safe. The Spaniards took note of the gentleness and simplicity and the innocence of the Native Americans, and they kind of took advantage of it. Battles for land. More than 2,500 battles fought between U.S. and the 131 native groups from 1776 to 1890. There was many battles that started for various reasons, like the Pyramid Lake War in 1860, when keepers of a Pony Express station along the Carson River kidnapped and raped two Northern Paiute women. A band of Northern Paiutes liberated the women and killed the 5 responsible men. Any conflict between a Native American and a European or a modern American, I guess at that time, could lead to a battle that lasted years. And from 1810 to 1900, the average number of conflicts per decade was 3.33, and the average duration of these conflicts was 4 years. And most of it stemmed from the westward expansion of the U.S. after the 1849 California gold rush. So as Americans headed west to look for gold, they ran into more Native Americans, tried taking their land, and started more conflicts. There were a few conflicts that were resolved through peace agreements or ceasefires, usually after 2 to 4 years of fighting. But it was a pretty lopsided outcome of all the conflicts. The USA won about 2/3 of them against the Native nations, and they were never really defeated outright. They never really lost. The U.S. government involvement. U.S. laws, politics, policies, and administrations tarnished the once full sovereignty of the indigenous nations. Basically, there was no government with the Native Americans when they were first here, and then when the U.S. settled and colonized, they kind of made up laws to take advantage of these people. The doctrine of aboriginal title comes from the 1823 Supreme Court case Johnson versus Mintosh, which found that the tribe did not have the full title to the land. So in 1823, the Supreme Court ruled that this tribe didn't have the right to the land, and it was kind of open season on who could take it from them. Discovery and occupation of lands inhabited by fierce savages whose occupation was war and whose substance was drawn chiefly from the forest conveyed the ultimate title to the civilized nation. So Bacon highlights the difference between the two cultures and groups, and kind of the irony behind what the Americans were doing. That they're supposed to be the civilized nation, and they looked at the Native Americans as the savages, but they were entering their land and not peacefully taking it. And it wasn't just in the past when the government has intruded on Native American culture and their groups. In 2018, the Trump administration drew up a new budget that called for major reductions in funding for Native American programs and services. Political, economic, and social achievements of Native people and tribes under self-governance are structurally vulnerable to the politics and policies of U.S. colonial administration. So basically, the Native Americans are at the hands of the U.S. government at all times, and there's not much they can do about it. Moving into the more of the stereotypes and misrepresentation of Native Americans, the Hollywood Indian, the four kinds of Native Americans that were depicted in films was the noble savage, ignoble savage, disappearing Native American, or the last of his or her kind. Enactments demonstrated audiences' justification for American conquest. So these movies, the way they depicted Native Americans, kind of made it seem like it was okay for what the Americans had done, and that the Native Americans sort of deserve to have their land taken away, that the Americans were the good guys. The stereotypes have stuck around. In the 1953 Disney film Peter Pan, there's a scene where the boys ask Big Chief what makes the red man red, and when did he first say ugh, and then the Native Americans in the movie dance and holler around the campfire, and this is just focuses on the stereotypes of Native Americans being red and them not really being educated or speaking, just making noises, and it really is insensitive. And there's been a lot of examples of this throughout the movie industry and the entertainment business as a whole. One of the main reasons this happens is because filmmakers have been non-native people telling stories about Native Americans, so they just do not share the perspective necessary to get it right, to represent a Native American correctly. This is a quote from Native American actor Adam Beach during his interview with CNN. They don't want to see us now. It's like that's the mentality out there, and we have to change it. They like us in the 1800s. Basically, saying that what made money in Hollywood was these cowboys versus Indian movies where Native Americans just look like savages and beasts, and so the fact that that's not really okay anymore to do that, to represent them like that, there's just no more representation of Native Americans in Hollywood. Some Americans go their entire lives without interacting with an indigenous person, and that lack of communication between groups of people can lead to misunderstandings. An example of that was, as depicted here, a picture from January 18th, 2019 at the Lincoln Memorial, when at the same time a pro-life rally, Black Israelites protest, and Indigenous Peoples March was going on. And this pro-life rally wouldn't let a member of the Native American March pass through as he was beating his drum. This photo and video went viral at the time. And Deborah Miranda, author of Bad Indians, a tribal memoir, had this to say on the incident. Here's what I also see, that the children in these videos have absolutely no true representations of Native Americans in their heads to prepare them in any way for this moment. They possess no point of reference for what an Indian person is other than howling stereotypes from westerns, Indian sports, mascots, bloody video games, and outdated novels or textbooks. So there's kind of a similarity of people today and the Europeans when they first arrived, that there's still an unfamiliarity with one another, and so they don't know how to act or interact with each other. A story of forgiveness. In 1791, fur trader and ship captain Robert Gray sailed into Tlaokia territory on Vancouver Island, where he kidnapped the son of Chief Wickaninnish and ordered the torturing of 200 houses in the village of Opitsat. And then in 2005, 3 canoes full of Gray's descendants pulled ashore at the same village to extend an apology. They knew the story and traveled thousands of miles from Oregon, Texas, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and London to acknowledge their ancestors' behavior and peace, to offer ourselves in good spirit to suggest that we'd like forgiveness and we'd like to honor our ancestral connection and honor your people. The Tlaokia appreciated the gesture and accepted their apology. They returned the respect shown by Gray's descendants, welcoming their new guests and treating them to a potluck. This was a big extension of the olive branch from the descendants of the Gray family. Obviously, they weren't the ones who did this to their people, but they're the descendants of the man responsible, so they have some sort of duty to make it up to these people and work towards moving forward from the horrible incidents that happened, and a lot of people should follow suit. Our ancestors made treaties that we are responsible for honoring and committed depredations that we are responsible for rectifying. Some reparations include the creation and evolution of the Sundance Institute's Native American and Indigenous program. This is a step made by the Sundance Festival to move away from those horrible Native American stereotypes that we've seen so often in movies. In 2015, the U.S. Department of the Interior and the Department of Education announced $5.3 million in grants will go to Native American tribal organizations. In 1990, the Native American Graves Protection and Reparation Act, NAGPRA, acknowledges tribal sovereignty and the right of Native Americans to human remains and cultural objects affiliated with their tribe. 1994 to 2008, over $31 million was awarded to more than 260 tribes and museums to support compliance with NAGPRA. And they grant around $2 million annually to museums and tribes. And around 97% goes to consultation/documentation grants and 3% to supporting reparation grants. They're giving the money to these Native Americans who are starting to become adults and go into college, and they want to give them resources for the work that they're going to do in college. So they supply things like building, training, data collection, database development, travel, equipment like cameras, scanners, and digital recorders. So as seen, there's a rich culture, a lot of history between the two groups. They are very close to one another. They're all in America, and it's important that they continue these reparations and gestures of moving forward, acknowledging the past and learning from it and moving forward. Thank you.